There we go. Hi, good evening and welcome. Welcome everyone. Dean, it's fantastic to see you back. It was awesome having you. I can't remember if it was 6 months ago or it was in the springtime, I think, when you came in and presented on Beyond Budgeting, and it was an absolute hit. You really knocked our socks off. So Giles and I knew, we've got to get you back for another session. So we're so pleased to have you here tonight with this nice intimate group that we've got here. So tonight you'll be presenting on something quite different actually than Beyond Budgeting, where we'll be learning from you about your take on the leader's role in enabling organizational competitiveness. And I know you'll be talking us through a number of things, including principles for nurturing, promoting continuous transformation that's respectful of legacy, recognizes established success, and is accommodating to each individual's growth journey. So I can't wait to dive into it with you. But for those of you that don't know Dean and weren't at his last session that he presented to ALN or in other meetup groups, he's an awesome business agility consultant and agile coach. He supports businesses with their transformations, developing new ways of working across departments. And also, he leads this amazing newsletter. I've got my copy here, The Agilist. If you don't have access to this, I totally recommend it. I think it's like, what is it, $2.50 a month? It's like the best £2.50 I spend a month. So, and I just learned that Dean's my neighbor, so I'm just going to pick this up in person from you going forward. But it's awesome. So definitely get yourself a copy. And on that note, Dean, please, over to you to take it away.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And thank you to Giles as well for your guys' kind of ongoing effort, now a global effort, to help support people in the business community and more specifically in the lean agile space. It's, you guys do some great work.
Sorry, that reminds me. I forgot to say, Giles sends his apologies. He's had to step in for some emergency last minute interviewing and hiring sessions for his company. So he's really sorry, but he'll definitely be here next time. So apologies for that.
No problem, no problem. Wishing all the best to Giles. And thank you for the name check of The Agilist. For those who don't know, it's an offline, print-only, non-profit publication, monthly publication for the Lean Agile community. And it's kind of getting over 100 subscribers, and it's sent every month out to lots of people who kind of look forward to receiving it and leafing through what I think is the best thought leadership in the lean agile space. So lots of great people who contribute to that publication. So thanks for the name check there. We have probably about an hour and 10 minutes on the clock. I think we might need that time just so you guys have a sense of how long this evening is going to be, or this afternoon if you guys are in a different part of the world to us in the UK and Europe. So I'm going to kick off by sharing a few slides about myself. We're also going to use a Menti to be able to allow us to be a bit more interactive and to generate some responses for everyone on the call here, just to generate some good conversation. So let me do a screen share. I'm just going to open up with a small number of slides. So bear with me as I get this set up. Okay, so as Ashley said, this talk is going to be around the leader's role in enabling organizational competitiveness and how perhaps the more traditional style of leadership may not be so appropriate to the fast changing world that we've all experienced in the last 18 months or so. A bit about myself. So I've been fortunate enough to work for a number of different organizations. Some of these are well known in the UK, some of these are well known globally. At the moment, quite recently, I joined a fantastic organization called Tech Systems. And Kemi is just doing a big thumbs up there because Kemi and I are colleagues and enjoying our times at Tech Systems. I've been there since January. Kemi and I help individuals, teams and organizations to find the best ways of working, the best kind of solutions to kind of support stakeholders and their customers as well. So a bit about the style of this evening. I'd like us to share stories and to share knowledge, but not only knowledge, kind of connect that knowledge with our experience. So I'm going to be sharing a few things, and I'm hoping I can spark a few kind of thoughts and a bit of debate and a bit of challenging and a bit of bit of kind of discussion around our own experience to the material that I'm kind of putting forward here. And it's all around kind of story sharing and storytelling. So I'm hoping we can do that this evening. I'd like to kick off though by a quote by Jack Welch, who was the CEO of General Electric, and at the time that became the most capitalized organization in the world in many, many different industries and lots of different sectors. And he said that if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. So if we think about that from an organizational level, if the rate of change outside the organization exceeds the rate of change or ability to change inside the organization, that organization may be entering into a place of existential crisis. Their viability, their validity, their place in the market may be becoming undermined. And it's my hypothesis that many organizations that they must have succeeded and been very close to the customers or close to the market opportunity in the early days, months, and years. Because how could they have bootstrapped their way into existence? But over time, pattern entrainment occurs where they begin to become pattern trained in their ways of working. They begin to protect their products and services. They begin to become siloed in quite rigid organizational structures. They begin to be individuals or teams may be incentivized by certain measures or rewards which may not be in keeping with a wider organizational goal. And quite often, I certainly potentially suffer from this. I tend to protect my own career. I protect my own business educational path, and that might not be helpful for the wider team or the wider organization. So what I'd like to do this evening is to, as leaders, whether you're a leader or you work with leaders, is to offer 4 considerations which allows individuals and teams and organizations to respond to change. And a lot of these things are non-traditional to many organizations. And one thing, as Ashley said, this is ways in which we can actually be sympathetic to the growth journey and direction of individuals and teams. So one thing we need to be aware of is there's been a great deal of market disruption. This has ever been the case, but perhaps things have accelerated and really kind of kicked into a huge acceleration in the last 18 months. And one way that we can think about this is using a tool often called Peston analysis, which looks at the macro picture which may be facing a business or perhaps a whole industry. So we could look at things from a political point of view. We can see in the last 18 months, or we can say the last 5 years, the impact of globalization, the impact of perhaps more populist governments, certainly in North America and in Europe and throughout the world, in fact. Economically, we know that we may be going into a period of stagflation where there's increased inflation, but economies aren't really growing. The landscape of employment is changing. We're kind of going through a time where there's a squeeze on employment. There are many, many more job opportunities in certain sectors than there are people who can fulfill those certain positions. When it comes to kind of social effects, we know that there's kind of a squeeze on household income. I know certainly in the UK, there was a lot of support that the Chancellor provided. That's going to be the case for countries throughout the world, but that support is going to be withdrawn. So the disposable income or the cash in the pocket is going to be less. And this is all going to be affecting our organizations. In terms of technology, there's always a kind of almost like a fetish-like drive for novelty and convenience. And this has all been enabled through technology. In terms of the legal effects, we know that tax policy changes in the industry, and certainly in the UK, there's been a great deal of change as a consequence of EU exit. Healthcare. I mean, I don't need to really kind of unpack this anymore, but the last 18 months has been an absolute um, 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 revolution in how we need to kind of consider healthcare from an individual, family, organizational, societal level impact, and also environment as well. That's another big area of kind of reducing the carbon footprint or considering, recycling and so forth. So all these things are culminating in a huge amount of market disruption. And another way of considering it is, there's quite a lot on this slide here, so I'm going to unpack it. There's an awful lot of market pressure. So customers, as I say, are always seeking novelty. They're always seeking convenience. There's a great deal of complexity and uncertainty. And this can be described looking at the illustration on the right-hand side. This is Porter's 5 forces. If he's put together, where does competition or market disruption occur? It can happen amongst existing competition. Buyers have greater bargaining power. So customers maybe, that they may be able to kind of walk away from a particular company or service. Suppliers may have greater bargaining power. There's always threats for new entries into the marketplace, and there's always substitution. So for example, a substitution could be, rather than go to the supermarket to pick up your food, your groceries, to cook a meal for your family in the evening, an increasingly common substitution is being able to use kind of home delivery apps to be able to get a meal on the cheap and very, very conveniently. The final thing in this slide here is looking at how well do business leaders actually truly understand how well they are serving their customers. And I just want to quote a piece of research by Bain & Company, that 80% of companies state they're providing a superior service. They believe they're providing a superior service, but when the surveys actually asked the customers, it was a tenth of that. 8% of customers agreed with that statement. And that's quite a stark difference, which I don't think many leaders actually realize. And this is all because of this market pressure, and customers can switch quite easily. So thinking about market disruption, I just want to play in one particular story. And it's going to be looking at existing rivals, new entrants into the market, and substitution of products and services. So Deliveroo is for those outside the UK, provides a service of delivering kind of takeaway meals. And Morrisons is a grocery retailer. And what's really interesting, they've partnered up so that Deliveroo is now providing a retail service by choosing the products from Morrisons and having an inventory of those services actually setting their own prices. And Morrisons, who were a grocery retailer, are now moving into the space of almost becoming a wholesale provider, which is really, really interesting. So this just shows business models are changing. There being lots of cheap capital going into the market and backing these kind of really adventurous market disruptive ideas. So I'm going to be coming back to this example a little later, but what I thought I'd do, I'll just pause for any questions and then move into the first session of Menti. So I'm just going to pause there, see if there's any thoughts or questions. Does it sound like it?
Yeah, when you say that Morrisons is becoming more of a wholesaler, is that reflected in their pricing?
So yes, so what's happening is they would be, I don't know, but I should imagine the wholesale price they give or they agree of Deliveroo is going to be cheaper than the retail price they have within their traditional supermarket retail stores. But they're still able to make a profit on that reduced price that they would agree with Deliveroo.
I know what happens here sometimes is that the price just something gets added onto the price, either a delivery fee or the prices are slightly higher for everything or a little bit of both.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Asked the question.
Yeah, I think the end consumer, those who get in their meals, their pasta or their pint of milk or whatever it might be in 10 minutes, they're going to be being charged a premium for that convenience. Absolutely. What I'd like to do is move to the first Miro question. So if you go to Miro.com and type in those numbers, so 12, 69,
is it Miro, is it Menti, Dean?
Sorry, Menti. Menti, apologies. Menti.com. If you go there and then type in that code, what I'm going to do, I'm going to get the first question ready. Just bear with me as I sort this out.
If you read out the code to us, I'll type it in the chat.
Yeah. The code is, bear with me, 12, 69, 88, 2.
There we go. Oh.
And then, okay, so I'm going to present. Hopefully you guys are seeing a question. You can do this on your mobile device or your desktop, whatever you prefer. So the question is, what market disruptions are you observing? And then there's going to be 3 text fields where you can type in something. As you enter something, it's going to, I'm going to be screen sharing a word cloud of what you guys are submitting. So yeah, if you could start filling in those questions and hit submit. If you can only think of one, just fill in one. You don't have to fill in all 3. Are people seeing the questions?
Yep.
Okay, great. Just whatever comes to mind. Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to screen share what's coming through. Okay. This is good. So we've seen vaccine approval, supply chain, social enterprise sustainability, rethinking life, quite profound, but probably true, remote working, less human interaction, consumer demand, freelancing. Yes, there's a lot of things from perhaps an employee point of view. So we've got to think about organizationally or from a leadership point of view, how do we respond to these things? Virtual working. Okay. So in the interest of time, we're going to keep that there. We may return to it. And then I'm going to go back to my screen share and then we'll continue. Okay, thank you for those submissions on Menti. So what I'd like to do for the rest of the time is look at 4 different areas where leadership style needs to change in order for organizations to respond to those disruptions you guys have already submitted, as well as the ones I've offered as well. And it's going to be in 4 different areas. And these areas enable the fostering of exploration and emergence for the organization, exploration of new opportunities, and allowing individuals and teams to actually emerge with what is the best fit for the fast changing world. And it's going to be in 4 areas. Leaders supporting individuals to test assumptions, leaders acting as ground conductors, and also I would add as supporters and protectors of certain teams. Number 3 is leaders creating a safe to learn environment. And number 4, leaders forming and protecting what's called an adaptive space for innovators and operators to work together. So I'm going to build on that, all 4 of them. But the first one I'd like to build on is number 1. So leaders supporting individuals to test assumptions. So one way of looking at this is looking at what leaders, teams, or organizations tend to do, the more traditional ones or the least responsive ones. And what they tend to do is take an ordered approach. And I'm going to be comparing the ordered approach to a more adaptive approach. We can think of a more ordered approach by individuals or leaders or teammates or colleagues having a fairly fixed mindset. So this tends to be characterized by metabolizing high uncertainty as a threat. So something gets outside of my zone of comfort, or there's an opportunity, or there's something which could be detrimental. I see that as a threat. How we respond to that is that we tend to employ false certainty. We're going to make a decision. We believe it's right, but we haven't really tested it. But we want to create false certainty in response to that piece of uncertainty. Something else which happens is there tends to be a reliance on past experience. This was successful in the past. Let's just do it again, regardless of how the markets change or the disruptive environment that we're in. What that creates is it provides comfort, but that comfort is misplaced. Thirdly, we try to shape and take control. Sometimes this is called predict and control. And this is a false belief, particularly in the fast changing world, of relying on a deterministic outcome of predefined steps. We want to get from A to B. We know B is going to be successful, and we know all the interstitial steps to get from A to B. That's very much an ordered response. An adaptive response, on the other hand, one which can be associated with individuals of a growth mindset or an organization of a growth mindset, is understanding that we don't know. So it could be leaders who acknowledge that they cannot be see all and know all. And it's leaders who adopted a stance of let's see what we can do. We know what our true north is. We know what our North Star is, but we don't know how to get there. Or I, as a leader, I could show vulnerability and bravery and honesty and saying, I don't know how to get from A to B. Let's think about how collectively we can do this. So as a leader, we ask different questions and we scan the world for differently, and we seek diverse voices. And those diverse voices could be those who are traditionally seen as dissenters. We need to give them time and space and an environment where they can actually experiment. And thirdly, when it comes to this adaptive response, is enabling a new approach for others, to actually enable others to actually create emergence and experimentation. So this could be around ways of working, it could be new products or services, it could be breakthrough innovation. So what we need to do as leaders, or how we support leaders, is to look for opportunities which are moving from an ordered response to an adaptive response. And I'm going to be providing some concrete kind of stories of where this has happened. Any questions on that before we go to another mentee? Or any stories that people would like to share from their experience?
I've got one. I mean, I'm sure we all have, I'm sure all of us have stories on this, Dean, but I'm literally working through this right now with such complexity. And what you have on the slide, totally get it, absolutely support it, but it's the how. And I know that you'll get to that, and I know you'll share your stories. It's when the cup is already full, if not overflowing, how do you get the cup level down so you can help fill it and give new ways in a safe space where they feel confident and comfortable to do that with the teams? But also the biggest challenge that I'm seeing with some of the clients I have now is to do this. People are running at the speed of light right now. I find there's like labor shortages everywhere. I don't know what's going on, but people are running really hot in all the companies I've been working with. And I'm trying to enable them to have the capacity to even face into this, right? So like reprioritizing, what are you driving? And pausing and stopping other initiatives to even give that capacity so we can even cross this bridge. I feel like some of the people I'm working with are like 5 bridges behind to priming you to even get to that point where you can even have a meaningful conversation on this now. So my hardest part isn't that itself, well, probably, but even getting to the point where they're in a place where they can digest this.
Yeah, absolutely. Does go ahead, Conrad, go ahead. You're on mute at the moment.
Yes. Ashley, there was a more statement, or you had a question inside of it?
I think it was more of a vent, to be honest, Conrad.
Yeah.
Post-work vent. And I'm sure Dean will, in the next slides, will give us some suggestions.
I have one thing I'm curious. Why you choose here the leaders support individuals instead of more like a teams or groups or organizations?
Yeah, that to me is a bit interchangeable.
Yeah,
senior leaders supporting like CIO -1 level to then support their teams.
okay. But this could be like more like a teams also, or groups of people.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Because I was curious about it, because sometimes you need to go on the individual path and support the individuals as a person, which is also valid. But I'm hearing from you this is interchangeable with teams or bigger groups to test the assumptions.
It's a bit of both, to be honest.
Okay. Good.
Yeah, I'd agree with Ash. Yeah, it's a good question, Conrad. I think it depends on the circumstance. It could be individuals, as Ashley says. It could be like CEO -1 or -2, and there could be a head of a division, and those divisions may be consistent of teams. So we may be supporting teams. Sheila, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I'm wondering, do you think that the type of people that get promoted to leadership lean in one direction or the other in most organizations, or do you think they're split?
It's a great question. I think it depends on the culture of the organization. If the culture has, I think it's a Facebook term, no, it's an Amazon term, a continuous day zero attitude, like every day they're at day zero of their startup, they're going to have that growth mindset, that adaptive response. So the leaders that get promoted and the managers that get promoted, if they're in that culture, then they're going to have an adaptive response. Whereas if the organizations are perhaps incumbent and they've scaled and they're mature and they're just in operational mode, those leaders or managers may be promoted more into a culture where they're going to be rewarded for being ordered and more operational.
What I'm wondering too is, I know some people who in their own thinking are very much growth minded, but I'm not sure they're always good at implementing that in the organization. They have the idea, but as far as the execution, I'm not sure if they really push it. Some people that I know that have moved into executive roles. Now I want to hear the answer to the question in the chat.
I haven't seen the chat yet. Let's have a look.
I was just going to have a little response to Sadhana. She had a question. Dean, can you explain on the bottom right, number 3, can you explain what you mean with the create the condition for emergence and experimentation?
Yes, that's right. So I'm going to unpack this a little bit more in the next few slides. But what I mean by that is, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, is that the leader's role is to articulate what's sometimes described as the true north of the organization. What's the mission? What is the vision of the organization? So, for example, Tesla's mission statement is to revolutionize the way in which we energize the world, or green technology, whatever it might be. But how that's done, we don't know how that's achieved, but we need to create these autonomous teams who are experimenting, and from that experimentation emerges different product lines or service lines. So for example, not only are Tesla looking at electric vehicles, they're looking to be able to have cheap and convenient ways in which we can capture, using solar panel roof tiles, energy for domestic use. Or it could be around using battery technology on a vast scale, on a national scale, to be able to store energy for later on, which is supplied by wind power or sea power. So this is leaders creating that destination, that vision, but then supporting those teams to remain orientated to that destination, but experimenting with what could be viable in the marketplace. And I'm going to be providing some examples on that. So I'm seeing Philippe. Hello, Philippe. It's got an example here with the reports about Elon Musk leadership. Tesla is more of an anti-pattern of distributed leadership. Philippe, do you want to kind of unpack that a little bit? If you're happy to go off mute.
Well, there's been quite a lot of report recently that come out of Tesla. And Elon Musk had been extremely hands-on, climate of really no psychological safety, sacking people on the spot that didn't agree with him and stuff like that. Now, those reports might be wrong, but when we take Tesla as an example, it doesn't look like an example to me. And actually, I'm starting to wonder in what way tech leadership in a climate of very big change and so on, and disruptive sort of inventions almost, or disruptive innovation needs people like that. I don't know. And I'm worried that, Steve Jobs was not a nice person, not at all. And those are the leaders that made those big companies. Is Jeff Bezos a great, yes, there's some principles of Amazon that we talk about, but how far is he actually operating like that? I don't know. And, and is that dysfunctional leadership actually what the leadership is needed in organizations? And I'm coming to question as well, how far it may not be great people leadership, but the great effectiveness is actually in maintaining a sense of travel and direction, despite the board, despite the shareholders, despite all those people asking for returns on quarters. And those people have a longer term vision that they're able to enforce where other CEOs are not. So I think it's worthwhile raising those questions, because we tend to take those examples, but I'm not sure that those examples are perfect examples.
Yeah, no, it's a very strong and good counterpoint there, Philippe. And I think later on I'm going to be showing Westrom's topologies of organizational culture, and it's going to look at pathological, generative, and bureaucratic as well. So that when we get to that point there, it'd be great to return to your point there and see if we can map those onto those topologies. But it's a very good counterpoint. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on, and in fact, I'm going to skip the second Menti and move on to the second opportunity leaders can have to ensure that there's emergence and exploration in organizations in order for that organization to be able to face into and maybe even capitalize on the market disruptions that we spoke about and you guys gave examples of at the start of this meetup. And in order to do that, I'd like to bring on board some thinking of David Marquet, who wrote the fantastic book, Turn the Ship Around. And organizations, if we think about them quite crudely as a hierarchical organization where we have lots and lots of teams and individuals, in this case at the bottom of the pyramid, and we have a handful of leaders at the top of the organization. What tends to happen in a traditional organization, particularly ones that have been around for quite a long time, and they feel perhaps incorrectly, they feel quite secure in what they're doing, is what tends to happen, there's information at the bottom of the organization where the teams and individuals are, and that information is passed up to those leaders for a decision to happen. And that decision is then passed back down through all those hierarchies, all those different layers of management for a decision to actually happen. So again, information is pushed up to authority, authority makes a decision, and then that decision gets passed back down again. There are lots of things which are not fit for purpose in a fast changing world there. If an organization outlearn and outperform against the competition, waiting for that information to go up and a decision to come back down again is no longer fit for purpose. So this old dynamic is one where, as I say, information is pushed to authority, whereas what we really need to do is look for opportunities where authority is pushed to information. Individuals and teams are given, if they understand what the true north is and have the clarity and competency to deliver successfully, there should be more opportunities for them to have authority to make their own decisions. And what I'd like to do before explaining how this is possible is just go to Menti again. So if you go back into Menti, go back into the tab that you have it open on, or go back to your mobile phone, and I'm going to queue up the third question and just ask you guys, in your organization or the clients that you tend to support, is the organization, does it tend to push information to authority? So push information up to the top of the pyramid for a decision to happen? Or does authority get pushed to information? Do the teams and individuals at the bottom of the organization, are they beginning to have more authority to be able to call the shots? So hopefully you're seeing the question. I've seen some submissions come through, so I'm going to screen share again to share the results as they come through. So it seems like there is a greater weighting to information being pushed to authority. Okay, see there's 8 responses, which is more or less all the people on the call there. So what I'm going to do is, are there any thoughts or questions as we just wait for the final responses? What is this telling us? To me, it certainly feels like that we are, with those we work with directly with our organizations or the organizations we support, there appears to be a tendency for information to be pushed to authority for some decision maker to make the decision, then get passed back down to the teams or individuals to carry out that action. And remember, we're pushing the decision away from those who are closest to the problem or opportunity. Let me go back to the presentation. Bear with me. Okay. So what David Marquet says is there's a dynamic between control and competency and clarity. If leaders are able to support the learning development, the technical capabilities of teams, and the more the team has an understanding of the mission of their particular business unit or the organization as a whole, the more they should be afforded control. There's a proportionality here where you can see that blue lozenge. That's where the sweet spot is. So, and what we need to do is look for opportunities where leaders can actually communicate what the mission is and provide the right skills and confidence for those individuals to increase their competency. The more we can do that, the more we can give them the authority to make their own decisions. And that means they can make more local decisions in a timely manner rather than pushing those information up to authority for the authority to make that decision at the top of the pyramid. So we need to look for opportunities where that can occur. So I'm just going to pause there to see if there's any questions or any builds on that.
So one question from this graph. I'm saying when the competence and clarity increase, the control increase as well.
Yeah. So what we need to do is we need to be moving up to the top right-hand corner, and there are steps in which that can actually happen. Is by giving leaders, teams a bit more control, and for those teams to actually demonstrate that are able to make those decisions. So it could be like a product or service decision for an existing service. And so what we need to do is actually move towards the top right corner. But what we need to do is to make sure that the competency and clarity is actually there at a team level for us to actually afford them greater control over their decision making.
Okay, I'm got it from a different perspective. So both control and competence clarity we're giving to the team, both of them.
Correct.
At the same time.
Spot on.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. So the way in which we can do this is thinking about a supported governance structure. So to me, that's like the right people making the right decisions at the right time with the right budget. So if we have maybe a particular vision or a particular kind of quarterly goal, maybe to look for customer growth for an existing product, what we can do is the leader can actually say, like approve a particular kind of product or service or a new piece of functionality, or go to a new market or new region. And what we can do is for the leaders to stay close to that decision making, but allow those teams to actually make that decision with particular kind of constraints, so the teams can actually learn at a small scale, through kind of rapid learning, what it would be like to go to a new particular region to look for new customer growth. So the leader actually needs to support rather than tell those teams to be able to kind of go to a new particular region or a new state or a new market. Okay, I'm going to move on to the third opportunity for leaders to support exploration and emergence. And one way to look at this is to think about, let me just go back. So this is actually creating a safe to learn environment. But before going into that, I'd just like to show you quite an interesting infographic. And this is looking at the balance between opportunities and stabilizing around existing products and services and continuously improving those. Sometimes this is called industrialization. Philippe, I've just seen your chat there. You do recognize this one. This is from a talk that Philippe and I did on Wardley mapping about 3 years ago. So those not familiar with Wardley mapping, definitely have a look at that. This is something that was conceived by Simon Wardley, and it's quite an impressive piece of work that he's put together. And so this particular slide is from some training that Philippe and I did. So again, I'd like to go back to the example of Deliveroo and Morrisons being the supermarket grocer. And what I'd like to do is for us to think back to when Deliveroo first formed. They were founded in 2013. And my question to you guys, at what end of the spectrum do you think they were? Do you think that at the end of the spectrum where they were being innovative, they were looking for lots of new opportunities and they're being very experimental, or do you think they're at the other end of stabilization, industrialization, and continuous improvement? So where do you think they were 8 years ago?
I would say more toward the left than right.
Yeah.
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 I'm pointing in that direction too.
You're pointing, your camera may be mirrored, Ashley. So we're not sure whether you're pointing to the left or right.
Left.
So you might have flipped your camera. Okay, so left, yes, indeed. Yeah. Seems like Akemi and Ashley are thinking to the left. I would agree as well. Now let's think about this grocery grocery retailer. So Morrisons was founded in the late Victorian age. When they first formed, where do you think they were? To the left or right?
In the industrial age they were made?
I would say in the first few years, they would have been around the experimental stage.
Yeah.
But now I think you're right, Ashley, they're more in the industrial side. They are a scaling operation. They've got hundreds of stores around the UK.
Mm.
And this would be true for every grocery market retailer, if you think about Walmart or whoever it might be. Now let's bring in this story of, remember, Deliveroo and Morrisons partnering up. So Morrisons actually providing products to Deliveroo. Morrisons acting as almost like a wholesaler to Deliveroo, for Deliveroo to actually service those products very, very conveniently in a few number of minutes to customers, and Deliveroo actually setting their prices. Where do we think Morrisons is on this scale between experimentation and continuous improvement of existing products and services in this particular example? Where do you think Morrisons are playing?
I would say that they are in opportunities. Yeah, because it's just they have started it, so they would try and experiment and see how things goes on.
Spot on.
Wouldn't they be in both though, Dean, where they
Yeah.
have that change and drive, where there's core ops is in industrialization, probably with their continuous improvements, but then they're innovating as well in pockets.
Yes, I think you're right. Yeah. Kemi, did you have a thought as well?
Yeah, I was thinking, I mean, they still have the traditional supermarkets, right? So they're still kind of operating in this managing control mode of industrialization. Then almost there's a new Morrisons kind of came out of that, which is operating in the left side of that, graphic.
And Sheila, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I think what's happening from what I'm seeing is that it's the same thing I've seen in other organizations, that within an existing company, they're creating a startup, either as a subsidiary, as a lab, or something where it's a startup within the existing organization that is out there being extremely innovative.
Yes.
And I'm hearing that formally said in a bunch of companies that I'm talking to right now, that we have a startup within the organization, and this is what it is, and this is where it is, and people there are being disruptive.
And do you think, Sheila, that they're being disruptive in the external marketplace? Do you think they're also being disruptive in the internal organization as well?
Some of them have reorged because of those changes, because of the disruption that they're causing in the marketplace. So like companies may have a totally different organizational structure than they did a year or so ago. And it may be because of what they've learned through these internal startups or internal labs that are functioning in that way to be intentionally disruptive and test the limits.
Yeah. And I think I agree. And I think those limitations aren't only in the external marketplace, but those limits also exist within the organization as well. Is culturally, how able is that perhaps quite a conservative organization able to stomach the innovators and internal entrepreneurs of the organization? So that's a dynamic which I think leaders need to be aware of. And I'm going to be providing an example on how that can be achieved.
One of the things I've been hearing from a lot of companies is that a year or so ago, they were organized around business processes in silos. And now they're reorganizing around product lines, where they still wind up with a silo, but the silo is based on the individual product or product family.
Yes. And I see Ashley's agreeing as well in the comments. I've seen the same too, Sheila, in large corporations. Ashley, feel free to unmute yourself and share your thoughts too.
And Sheila, that's ironic. Sorry, just responding to what you said about structuring your own product lines and then silos.
Well,
That's ironic. That's the whole reason
but
you
it's a
do that to
pendulum
break
that
down
swings.
silos.
Yeah, and it creates new silos.
Yeah, there's some cultural work there, I think, that needs to be had. And yeah, I've seen it too. I've seen it in numerous large corporates, turnover over $1 billion, those where they either acquire or invest in-house in areas where they give the freedom and a frame to innovate. But then you get to a point where what I've seen is these pockets where they're trying to innovate and have a new offering, a new product, a new service. They hit a point of maturity where the business is like, right, well, we need to govern you now, or you're going rogue. You're being seen as going rogue, and we're going to put internal audit on you, right? And lovely threats ensue.
Yeah.
You know, and then you really have to face the music then, where you challenge, is the way that we're working still enabling us to achieve our outcomes or not? And then people have to face the music, I think. So it's a nice door opener to have tough conversations that otherwise probably wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. And in a few slides time, I'm going to be providing a structured approach in which this can actually occur within organization. Conrad, you got your hand up.
Yeah, one question to the story. I don't know the story exactly. The Morrison together with Deliver, but they are collaborating together.
True.
So the question, so that's why I'm still also very industrialization part of the graph, because the question is, does Morrison change something? Because they are not doing this by themselves. They just choose the partners, please do it, and we give you a good prices. So it could be that there is no big change on Morrison's side besides having another partner to sell and distribute the all learnings to the delivery. And actually they are having only some numbers. The selling is bigger. This is the question, how do they approach it?
Yeah, yes, it's a good question. I suspect there is strong internal debate within Morrisons about whether they should even attempt to do this, because it is going to undercut their existing business model. Not only are they allowing this effectively a startup to take their products and put a different price on it, they may begin to cannibalize their existing supermarkets, and they're going to lose control. And there's going to be lots of conservative people within the organization who may be not supportive of such an approach. So it's almost like perhaps operationally it's not a great change, but culturally it's going to be a big change. And so it's like moving to experimentation, almost in mindset and belief and expectation of what this brand actually stands for. So even if operationally it's not a big change, I think culturally it's going to be quite exciting for them, and some people aren't going to be that supportive, let's say. Okay, in the interest of time, we just got over 20 minutes left. It's a great conversation. I might not be able to get through all my slides, but I don't really mind, because we're generating good conversation and good debate. In order to try and catch up on time, I'm going to skip over this Menti and come on to something called the Westrom's organizational culture. So he put together in the last, I think, 15, 20 years, typologies of different organizations. And I mentioned this when Philippe was talking about, you know, we've really got to question some of these startups or the kind of leaders of these big tech companies like Elon Musk and maybe Bezos when he was still at Amazon. So I'm not going to read this all out. There's quite a lot on this slide here, but there could be organizations which tend to be categorized by being pathological. So orientated towards power, there's low cooperation, or organizations could be bureaucratic. So it's very much around rule setting and rule following. So you could think about the civil service or big government here. There's modest degrees of cooperation. And then there's also generative organizations, which are around they're performance orientated. There's a higher degree of cooperation. There's great encouragement for people to work across silos. Despite the silos, hey, you know, I'm going to go pick myself off my seat and just go and speak to someone in a different department and say, hey, I've got this idea here. Why don't I have a chat with you and your manager to see whether this is going to land or not? If it's a generative organization, that's going to be welcomed. So I'm going to tell you a story about how an organization has moved from a generative one to one which is a little bit more bureaucratic. And this is the organization which is NASA. So in the early years of NASA, in the kind of late 50s, early 60s, they had a fantastic set of programs, a Mercury program and the Apollo program, where managers and engineers spoke every day with their counterparts in lots of different fields. And they had a great deal of success. And this could be described in a small passage of text that I've got from Barry O'Reilly's book, Unlearn, which came out 2 or 3 years ago. So I'm going to read this out. So NASA was having tremendous success with its manned space program. So this would be Mercury and Apollo. But the organization was so in the seats of failure, creating false intellectual superiority and impermeable towers of information. In time, those towers turned into silos and they stopped information from flowing across the organization. So they're becoming from generative to bureaucratic. This became a very real problem for NASA, and it led directly to catastrophic failure, which resulted in the loss of life. And those who are old enough would remember the Challenger disaster in 1986, and they unfortunately lost 7 astronauts quite publicly. And what happened there's a problem in the booster rockets, which helped the shuttle get to altitude. And there's a failing in the seals of those rockets, and those failings occurred in the cold temperature which the the shuttle was launched. There was great pressure from the government, actually, because it was partly a publicity stunt for the shuttle programs to launch this shuttle, and it happened in a very, very cold morning. And the sealant of the booster rockets failed. But there are parts of NASA who knew that this was going to be a problem, and they desperately communicated, say, do not launch a shuttle. But because of the silos, because of the bureaucratic nature, and because of the public pressure to actually launch a shuttle, unfortunately, that shuttle launch leading to the destruction of that shuttle and the unfortunate loss of life. So you can see here a movement from a generative organization to one which is bureaucratic and one which is no longer putting the safety and the creativity at the forefront of the organizations do. And that's an example of from NASA. No doubt there are countless other organizations which have probably made that transition, that unfortunate transition. I'm not sure if anybody else has got any examples of where that might be happening, or maybe where that has happened in other organizations.
Yeah, I would like to share this. I was working in a company where we started, like it was a startup, and we started with 10-20 people, and then later on the company started growing, and when it was like 250 people, we feel like leaders, they're like more like we don't have so much conversations happening with the team members, and there was like layers of management leaders, and the communication wasn't helpful. So the management will come up with a different plan, but the developers like the team members whom are working are all following the product manager or whomever you can say, they were following different things. But end of the day, when we deployed or when we like tell the customers like, okay, this is the product we are going to do, and when we came up with the metrics, then we understood, okay, this is not something we wanted to deliver. And then only after those things happened, the management team understood that, okay, we are not communicating very well to the product team because of so many layers, because of having too many managers. The information isn't passed very cooperatively, and they understood that it's not happening as usual. So it was very not generative, and yeah, everything was within the manager. For example, say like you have 3-level managers, the team will be understanding only the least like top level 3 managers, but nothing will be shared to the level 2 or level 1 managers. So they thought that, okay, everything works as expected. And end of the day, it was like a bit catastrophic things happened, failure and all these things.
Thank you, Sadhana. That's a really good personal example you've shared there. Thank you. And that's in keeping with this kind of movement, or this particular cultural topology of one which is bureaucratic. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
In the interest of time, I'm going to move on and very quickly touch on another organizational psychologist, Edgar Schein. And he talks about the dynamic between survival anxiety and learning anxiety. And what tends to happen, the traditional way of leadership is one where, you know, change needs to occur, and then a leader may describe like a burning platform. Describing a burning platform is only going to make people fearful and resistant to learning. So what we need to do is look for opportunities for where we know that we need to be able to change and reorganize ourselves, or be able to unlearn to relearn new skills and new opportunities. And we need to reduce that learning anxiety. So this could be done by leaders conveying the business reality, providing the right kind of coaching support, developing the right kind of growth pathways where people can actually learn at their own pace and you know, under their own momentum, and also enabling opportunities where the leaders can go first and show that vulnerability that I showed last time, where the leader raises their hand and saying, we know we've got this mission, don't know how to get there, I've never been here before, but I would like to be kind of very open and look for opportunities where we can actually experiment and learn of how we can actually move ahead in this disruptive market. And this may not be for everyone in the organization, so we can look for those early adopters who are open to kind of rapid learning and learning through change and potentially through kind of failure to kind of support that safe to learn environment. I've just seen here Philippe's given another example of British Airways blaming one engineer for taking down all their systems, a mistake of a few years ago. Philippe, do you want to share that example, because it's getting some good resonance on the chat?
Yeah, that's the. I mean, British Airways, all reservations and so on went down about, I don't know, it was a couple of years ago, I think. And the CEO eventually apologized, saying it was, you know, an engineer's fault. And I think they were actually even saying that they were removing the engineers from duty. But that, I mean, where do we start to explain how wrong this is? If you know, all the reservation system can be taken down by one small mistake, and the resilience of the whole organization is really in question, and the bad choices that the said leadership would have made for, you know, a long time to get in that state should really be questioned. And yeah, so actually, you know, if they sack the engineer, they should have sacked the CEO over that type of matter. Not that it's that helpful to sack the CEO, but we shouldn't necessarily sack people, but it's a blatant, complete lack of understanding of how to run an organization that relies on technology.
Yeah. Before the call, Ashley was describing a situation which is fairly close at hand, where an organization's fired all its product owners. So that's kind of like quite a reactive approach. So yeah, so that can actually happen. I'm going to skip over a few slides because we've only got about 10 minutes left. I want to talk about a fourth area, and that is where leaders can form and protect what's called an adaptive space, where innovators and operators can actually come close together and actually support each other. But first of all, I want to describe the realities in which many organizations are in. Apologies, let me just get to the right slide here. So we can describe organizations having two different systems. One is the operational system, where we have people working on existing products or services, and they have certain pressures of of continuously optimizing, getting operational efficiency out of existing products and services. We also have this entrepreneurial system where we have those innovators, those entrepreneurs internal to the organization, but they also have pressures as well. Their pressures are one of finding new success. What tends to happen in large organizations is the operational system stifles the emergence and the survival of the entrepreneurial system. But what we need to look for are, in a fast moving world, we need to look for new products and services where, and in a situation where the entrepreneurial system can actually support the operational system to adapt. So the way in which we do that is, this is the work of Mary Albeen, an academic who's very strong in this space around organizational design and complexity and emergence within traditional organizations. What we need to do is look for an environment where the innovators can look for novelty, and the operational systems do need to improve the current results, but in the way in which things are novel, and experiment very, very rapidly. And through that, a new viable future maybe become valid, and one in which we can scale. So to do that, I want to give you a real example of a supermarket retailer that I worked for a number of years ago. This is a traditional organization, but what they wanted to do is run some small scale experiments after assembling some simple technology to allow customers to make purchases by scanning the barcodes of different products. And the fear from some stakeholders with this will increase theft, which is understandable because customers could pretend to scan the barcodes and pay with Apple Pay and put it in their bag and just walk out the store. So what we need to do, we need to design an experiment which recognizes and test where the theft would go up. And we did this using a concept called limited liabilities. So we brought innovators and operators together to design an experiment where we used limited liabilities. So we only experimented in 3 stores for less than a 2-week period for a small number of products. And this happened to be products which were in the meal deals, not everything, certainly not wines, spirits and beers or anything like that, quite cheap products. And the team only had a small budget. So the limited liabilities was a small number of stores for a small duration of time for only a small number of products, and they only had a budget to run an experiment for a couple of weeks. So therefore, we actually designed an experiment where those skeptical stakeholders could say, yes, okay, despite the risk, I accept the experiment can go ahead under these conditions. And what we did, we assembled this technology, we took it into the stores, and we actually experimented with our own colleagues first of all. So again, that's another way of doing limited liabilities. We had some early success, we learned some strong lessons, and we made some small experiments, and then we scaled it to a few more stores. Again, the limited liabilities got a little bit better, a little bit more expanded, because those skeptics, those stakeholders were a little bit unsure, increased their belief that perhaps we were backing a horse which may just be viable in a wider market. So this is an opportunity, just going back to those graphics down below, where those innovators can work with those operators on a very, very small scale to look for an adaptive space where they can challenge each other. Those skeptical stakeholders can actually challenge each other and co-design an experiment which could be successful. And for this particular retailer, this was successful. This did actually work. Not all of these ideas are going to work, but what they've created is a viable future, which is now producing a service for their customers, which is beneficial because they don't have to queue up anymore. They can just purchase products, put it in their bag and walk out the store. So they've created a viable future, one which wasn't stifled by the operational system closing down the entrepreneurial space for those innovators. I'm just going to pause there to see if there's any questions on that example or this concept of innovators integrating with operators. Okay, doesn't sound like it. Okay, my last slide I'd like to share is another important factor that I've certainly experienced, but one which Mary Orbeen also talks about. And this is something that leaders don't tend to acknowledge or design for. And this, again, this is where innovators can actually integrate with the operational system. And it's one around social capital and looking for those individuals which do very well at bridging between different silos. So figure one looks at different groups, and within those groups of people, those teams, there's strong group cohesion. And this is basic human nature, is that connected individuals form close bonds. And what tends to happen is there tends to be the development of in-group preference, almost like a small collective which comes together. And there's a great deal of redundancy between those connections, those small groups of people, say 5 people plus or minus 2. Information is shared with a great amount of trust and a great amount of speed. But what happens, those bubbles form, or these clusters form, where information is not really being shared between clusters. So what we need to do is benefit from a phenomenon called social capital and look for individuals who can actually bridge between those clusters. So thinking about that past example, there could be an individual who does very well at conversing with those innovators and also converse very well with those operators to bring this, create this adaptive space where those 2 different systems can talk to each other to create an experiment which everyone can back and everyone can be invested in. So they're almost like act as brokers. So this is something where leaders need to kind of turn their attention. Who is naturally the bridges between those different silos, those different clusters, and how can we support them to create that emergent space? Okay. Going to close in the next couple of slides. So again, I'd like to do that just by going back to that Jack Welch quote. So if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. And this, I believe, is going to be the reality for many organizations. So how can leaders respond to that by fostering exploration and emergence? So organizations can actually face into these market disruptions and actually benefit from them. And I mentioned 4 different things, 4 different opportunities. So leaders being able to support individuals to test and learn. So moving from that ordered space to that adaptive space. Leaders acting as ground conductors. So pushing authoritative information so teams and individuals have the right they can work within the right kind of constraints. Leaders creating a safe to learn environment for exploration and emergence, so kind of reducing that learning anxiety. And the final one I shared is like leaders forming the right adaptive space where innovators and operators can work together. And I gave you another kind of build on that of leaders looking for those individuals have an ability to bridge between different silos or different clusters. I'm going to pause there to see if there's any final builds or stories that people want to share before closing. Okay, it doesn't sound like it. So on that note, I'd like to thank you all for coming along. I'd like to thank Ashley and Giles for creating this opportunity with the Agility Leadership Network. And if you guys want to reach out to me to continue the conversation, my contact details at the bottom of this slide. And many thanks.
Great, thank you, Dean. As always, fantastic interactive session and so salient for us within the Agility Leadership Network, because you really focus on the leadership component of this, of how do we, be better agile leaders for our clients, for our own organizations. And when you do come in and speak with us, We learn as much from you when you share these leading insights and real examples and bring it to life, but then you facilitate this really safe space with pause, without time constraints, without the pressure, where we can share our own stories and learn as much from one another as we learn from you, which is really special. And that's a really powerful trait of yours with the talks that you always lead. So thank you. Thank you, Dean. We hope to have you back again, maybe next year. I think with the ALN, we have Nigel Thurlow next month, Tuesday, 9th of November, founder of Flow System and Scrum the Toyota Way. So I'll get that posted in the coming weeks. Ideally next week, I'll probably get that posted. But thank you again. Thank you, Dean. That was absolutely fantastic. Love having you here. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Have a great evening. Have a great afternoon. See you all next month. Take it easy.
You.